Professor Napier, as many of you know already, is Associate Professor of Philosophy at Villanova University. His publications include Virtue, Epistemology, Motivation and Knowledge, Persons, Moral Worth and Embryos, very good collection. And his core interests are in epistemology, bioethics and the metaphysics of persons, which is a very interesting intersection. And we're very happy to have him here today at our BIOS Work in Progress seminar to discuss his talk on moral enhancement. So I'll hand over to you now, Stephen. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Fiona, and thank you, Helen, for the invite. So this is based on a paper that just got published. When I first got the invite, it wasn't accepted yet. So it's not, I don't know if it's a work in progress unless I can do a reboot on some of the material. So yeah, as the title suggests, I want to talk about moral enhancement and the background. I kind of want to rush through some of the first few slides here and really try to focus attention on the argument that I want to get at. So I might be going a little bit quick here. You know, some background, if we start with our considered intuitions, moral enhancement sounds great. There are few principled objections. One might be, well, it kind of calls into question one's authenticity. More popular might be practical or technological objections. One example of that is Robert Sparrow's critique of moral enhancement. I'll just read the quotation because I really think it gets at the core problem with some practical or technological problems. The claim that we are acting for the right reasons implies that our motives for action are tracking the reasons that we have to act. Acting for the right reasons, therefore, requires that agents should respond in the right way to counterfactuals. If we praise someone for helping another person who is in need, our assessment that their action is morally admirable rests upon the thought that they should not have been motivated to help them in the same way if the other person were not in need. And then he goes on, a drug that made us feel the right emotion, believe the right things, and resonate with the right values in the specific context would be a remarkable drug indeed. So that's kind of Sparrow's objection in terms of the practical or technological objections. But I want to ask a different question. I want to ask the question, is it even rational from the first person perspective to undergo a moral enhancement? So because moral enhancement implies a change in terms of belief, we might say, or a change in the sensitivity of one's faculties, is it rational from the first person perspective to choose that? That's the question I want to ask. So, excuse me, I'm recovering from a cold. Quick background, I want to rush through this fairly quickly. I don't want to die on the hill of distinguishing between conventional and unconventional, but it is somewhat useful going forward. So Bostrom and Sandberg make this distinction in their 2009 article. And roughly, they want to say conventional means use your own faculties. Unconventional means, at least in the article, they're referring to moral enhancements, are ones that are kind of new, like a neuroprosthetic or a drug. I want to suggest that unconventional means of moral enhancement would bypass, in a way, one's own agency. So taking a pill might assist, but it doesn't, I mean, this is getting to Everill's point in his articles. It might assist me, but it's really, it's adding to the exercise of my own faculties, right? Or it might just outright bypass it in the case, like, say, a neuroprosthetic or something like that. Moral enhancement can be understood as either a change in belief, a change in the sensitivity of one's moral faculty, or a change in one's moral behavior, or all three, okay? I'm focusing attention on the first, the change in belief, and maybe tangentially the second change, a change in the sensitivity of one's moral faculty. One important distinction concerns rationality. So as I'm using the term in this presentation, in this paper, I'm using it in its epistemic sense. It can be understood in a prudential sense as well. So with respect to prudential rationality, that's satisfied whenever an agent believes B because doing so will confer a good. But this good may or may not be alethic. It might not be something that the agent, something pertaining to the truth of what the agent wants to do. Whereas epistemic rationality is satisfied when an agent believes B because, by her own lights, B seems most plausible, right? Seems most likely to be true, or it coheres logically with her other beliefs. And I want to focus attention on epistemic rationality. So the original question, is it rational? Is moral enhancement rational? To rephrase that, is it epistemically rational? All right, so to place these questions in context, I want to situate them in an actual empirical study. Crockett and colleagues in 2010, excuse me, found that those with pharmacologically enhanced serotonin levels were more likely to judge that killing the one innocent person in a judicial murder case is wrong. And here you have the first line. Here we show that the neurotransmitter serotonin directly alters both moral judgment and behavior through increasing subjects' aversion to personally harming others. Okay. Excuse me. All right. So suppose someone is familiar with that study, and we'll call her Jane. Right? So Jane, let's suppose that she's an act-utilitarian and she's inclined to think that it is permissible to kill the one in order to save the others. Suppose that Jane is informed of the Crockett study. Would she be rational from her own perspective in taking the serotonin enhancing pill? Now, if she really thinks that killing the one is permissible, I don't see how it could be rational for her to take it, but I'll explain a little bit more detail. She could also be undecided, or she could also believe that it is impermissible to kill the one, right? So permissible to kill the one, undecided, or impermissible to kill the one. And here's what these look like. If she already thinks that it is permissible to kill the one, and she's informed of the Crockett study, namely the Crockett study suggests that taking the serotonin pill is going to change her belief. It's going to make her believe that that's impermissible. That's not going to cohere with her background beliefs and her other commitments. So it'd be irrational for her to take the pill. If she already thinks that it's impermissible, then she doesn't need the serotonin enhancing pill. And if she's undecided, here's where my argument gets a little bit more complicated, but I still think the same result follows. She doesn't have a reason for taking the serotonin enhancing pill. Excuse me. Okay. So let's take this uncertainty scenario. Cases analogous to uncertainty scenarios are cases of peer disagreement, except instead of thinking about peer disagreement in terms of my disagreement with another person, in uncertainty scenarios, my intuitions conflict. So my intuitions, in a way, disagree with one another. And I suggest that these are enough like peers who disagree with one another to construct an analogical argument. One might say that uncertainty on a moral issue is a function of intra-disagreement or intrapersonal disagreement. The idea being our intuitions conflict. Okay. So why does peer disagreement give one no reason for opting for the serotonin enhancing pill? Well, one way to understand this is that peer disagreement is taken by many to count as a reason to reduce one's credence in a disputed belief. Here I'm referencing Christensen's 2007 article. The reasons differ as to why one should reduce one's credence, but they share, however, the feature that peer disagreement is evidence for a processing error. Clayton Littlejohn expresses the point this way, quote, "The fact that you disagree is a reason to think that you and a putative peer were out of your depths, or that one of you suffered from a performance error." Since each disputant cannot provide a non-circular justification for why their own faculties are functioning reliably in the dispute, a disagreement functions as undischarged evidence for a performance error. Okay? Here, what you have is two arguments side by side. P stands for this person who disagrees with me as a peer. Just D is just a placeholder for proposition. I know that they disagree with me. So if I believe that the other person is a peer, premise 2 is they now disagree with me. Well, the conclusion that follows is that I should lower my credence and not be, right? But on the right-hand side, we have, well, suppose I come across this disagreement. Well, I can use the very belief in dispute as a reason for thinking that my putative peer is no longer a peer, right? But that would be assuming exactly what's in question, right? It'd be circular in this pattern. Okay. Can motivate this a little bit further. Pasnow motivates the view that one must remain impartial in settings of disagreement, whether, again, inter or intra, in an interesting way. So what he does is he exports John Rawls's veil of ignorance thought experiment. And Pasnow has us imagine that you and an interlocutor are disputants to a debate, but with the following twist: you are to set aside who you are in this debate. We are to set aside which position is ours. So you want to kind of the veil of ignorance, right? So we have this debate, we have these positions, and we're to set aside who we are in that position. He says, let us imagine ourselves informed about all the factual circumstances of the situation, what is agreed upon, what is contested, what the opposing arguments are, what the credences are of the contending parties, but without knowing who we are in the dispute. To say that we would not know who we are means that we would know neither where we stand on the proposition in dispute, nor any other relevant propositions that are contested by the two sides. The point of the thought experiment is to motivate the view that one's own beliefs should not get special weight just because they are my own, or just because they follow from what seems right to me. Pasnow calls this position impartiality. So he kind of motivates this view of impartiality, similar to how the veil of ignorance thought experiment goes. One cannot assume that the other has made a processing error, since that would be obviously circular. The result is diffidence on the issues for which the disputants disagree. Now, the other in cases of intra-disagreements are simply my other intuitions, right? It's the output of the same faculty, the moral faculty, and they're just competing intuitions that render one uncertain. They are the agent's own in a very important sense. She might believe strongly in both a principle that it is wrong in all circumstances to kill the innocent, and this principle entails that it is wrong to kill the innocent in the judicial murder case. She might have the intuition that it's permissible to kill the innocent to save the five in that circumstance. And here you can see, you can have this tension. So in circumstances in which the agent is uncertain and has thought about the issue, The agent is in a situation analogous to cases of peer disagreement. She should be diffident on the issue in question, and given our impartiality, she cannot prefer one view over the other. All right. So what follows? In regard to moral enhancement, what follows is this. Does she have a reason for ingesting the serotonin-enhancing drug instead of continuing to rely on her own faculties? If we ask this question in the context of interpersonal disagreement, we get the following results. If the agent already thinks that it is permissible to kill the one innocent, she has no reason to ingest the drug, assuming full knowledge of the Crockett study. Doing so would be epistemically obsolete or redundant. If the other peer thinks that it is not permissible, ingesting the drug would be irrational. Right? Again, full knowledge of the Crockett study, that it would change that belief. If we place this tension within the same agent, just imagine us placing these positions within the same agent, she now has no reason for favoring one over the other option, again, assuming impartiality. And impartiality is motivated on the Pasnow's thought experiment. She has no reason for thinking that the drug would deliver a preponderance of true moral beliefs instead of continuing to rely on her own inquiry or the exercise of her own faculties. She has no reason for epistemically favoring her faculties, cum serotonin pill, versus her faculties alone. All she has reason for believing is that the pill will make her believe more strongly in the judgment that one ought not to be killed, the one ought not to be killed, a belief for which she is justifiably diffident. More generally, she has no reason for thinking that the process that produces it usually bequeaths true moral beliefs. So to summarize this particular horn of the trilemma being Jane already believes that it's impermissible to kill the one. The second horn, she believes that it's impermissible. This is the uncertain scenario. Excuse me. Knowing that a processing mechanism delivers true moral judgments requires that one believe such judgments or such outputs of the mechanism to be true, and two, that the mechanism in fact produces them. My argument is that agents who are uncertain cannot know that condition one is satisfied. It follows that agents in such a scenario cannot know that a deputative enhancement mechanism is reliable. Therefore, an agent in the setting of uncertainty does not have a reason for ingesting a serotonin-enhancing pill. Okay. Now, one might say that all I've argued here, if you look at the conclusion, is that she doesn't have a reason for doing so. Well, I haven't argued that there's no reason against doing so, right? So why not conclude that, yeah, she could take the pill or she couldn't, right? That might be one way to dodge the conclusions of this. Well, I find it plausible to say that taking the enhancement in settings of uncertainty is not irrational, since there's no reason against it, right? I'm also inclined to hold, however, that violating impartiality is irrational. All right. What do I do with this tension? Given what I think follows from accepting impartiality, these two intuitions conflict. One way to make such a tension coherent is to consider explaining both intuitions with reference to different notions of rationality. The reason why one might think it is rational to take the enhancement is because it is prudentially rational, right? Doing so accomplishes a goal, namely the resolution of the inquiry. So again, in the setting of uncertainty, right, she has no reason against doing so. And it seems prudentially rational for her to go ahead and take the pill. Okay. But the intuition that one is not rational to take the enhancement can be explained by voicing epistemic rationality. The action is bereft of a reason that the agent herself appreciates as being true and which favors doing one over the other. And since I'm concerned in this presentation with epistemic rationality, I still conclude that in the uncertain scenario, it is epistemically irrational to take the enhancement. If we back away just a bit with the specifics of taking a serotonin enhancing pill, the general point can be made without reference to any putative enhancement procedure or drug. The core question is how an agent can be justified in thinking that a means of enhancement would truly augment her moral faculties. The agent would have to think that the outputs of such augmentation are more likely true than if one relied on one's non-augmented faculties. And at this point, the previous stated trilemmas recapitulate. If the agent already thinks that the outputs are true, the augmentation would be viewed as obsolete, and there is no reason to choose it. If the agent does not believe the outputs, she or he has no reason for choosing it, since he would be choosing to augment his faculties such that they deliver beliefs for which he thinks are false, and that would be epistemically irrational. If he is uncertain what to think, there is no reason for favoring relying on one's own faculties versus choosing the putative augmentation, since there is no reason for favoring the outputs of one over the other. My augmented faculties versus my faculties not augmented. In no scenario is one justified or has a positive reason for choosing the putative augmentation. Therefore, there is no scenario that would be in which it would be epistemically rational to choose an unconventional moral enhancement. Okay. All right. Well, a couple of things. A couple of objections come to mind. So in one sense, moral enhancement can be used to improve one's pro-social behavior or to prevent one from performing antisocial behaviors, one of those two, right? Improving one's pro-social behavior or preventing anti-ones. Examples might include, you have a couple here, chemical castration of known sex offenders, pharmacologic means to curb an addict's cravings. I've thrown in here incarceration in a way modifies one's behavior, right? In a sense. All right. So with reference to my overall thesis, how could it be rational for a psychopath, for example, to take a pharmacological regimen aimed to modify his behavior so that he stays out of jail, right? So if a psychopath takes some regimen, all right, that seems rational, and I agree that particular action would be perfectly rational. In each of these examples, however, the beliefs of the agents do not necessarily change, even if their behavior is modified towards pro-social ends or prevented from realizing their antisocial intentions. These are modifications of one's behavior and in some cases a clear improvement, okay? But it strains intuition to call them enhancement because in each it leaves untouched the agent's actual moral commitments. And here, would we say that a sex offender is morally enhanced even though he retains his paternalistic and objectifying beliefs about women? I suspect we would say no, or we should say no. So cognitive enhancement, again, on Bostrom and Sandberg's view, is a modification of one's core capacities. That seems to be what we should care deeply about. Excuse me. There's one other objection I don't have here. That's the end. I was thinking of it right before we started. One might say, okay, well, does my conclusion entail that, let's say, you have somebody who's pro-life, right? And they're deeply committed to the pro-life position. And you suggest to that person that, well, you know, maybe you should read some pro-life choice literature, right? Maybe get out of your worldview a little bit, right? Most of us would say that that would be a moral enhancement, right? The person would be expanding their viewpoints. They might change, they may not, but still that would be enhancing in some sense, at least in regard to their ability to understand the position a little bit better. Well, it looks like the pro-choice book is kind of like this pill for the excuse me, for the act utilitarian in the Crockett case, right? For the act utilitarian, remember, thinks it's permissible to kill the one, right? But the serotonin enhancing pill, as Crockett found, would actually modify that belief. It would change that belief, right? So one might say that, well, reading pro-choice literature would function like this pill, and it would be irrational for a pro-life person to read pro-choice literature on my argument. Okay, that's how the objection might go. And I want to say, well, no, I don't think that's the conclusion that I want to have follow from my argument. And that's because of this. So when a person who might be very certain of a viewpoint then has to go out and maybe read some other material, at each point that person is going to be exercising his or her own faculties. And this is one of the things about inquiry is we have to assume that our faculties, our own faculties, are reliable, right? Otherwise, inquiry would just stop. And so it's perfectly rational for a person to expose oneself to other viewpoints. And there's nothing irrational about that, even given my argument. Why? Because at each point, the agent would be exercising his or her own faculties, and one must assume that one's own faculties are reliable to even engage in inquiry. Okay. All right, so to kind of summarize, again, is moral enhancement rational? When you try to address that question from the first person perspective, there are basically three options. On one hand, the agent who is about to take this moral enhancing means, whether a pill or a neuroprosthetic, there is some assumption that one's beliefs might change. Well, if you already have those beliefs, the enhancement is obsolete. If you disagree with the outputs of the moral enhancing pill, then it would be irrational for you to take it. And then if you're uncertain, you don't have any reason for doing so, and it would be epistemically irrational to do it given impartiality. Okay, so I'll stop there. I want to leave enough time for discussion and questions, but that's the core of the argument. Okay.
Great, Stephen. Thank you very much. I'll just open the floor then to questions, if anyone wants to kick us off.
Well, I don't have a question, but I'd just like to say thank you very much for that. Bit of a mental workout for me there.
Good, glad I could do that.
Okay, well, I'll just skip in with the chair's privilege then, and I'd like to just there's just lots of interesting parts here, so I'm going to just choose one to begin with. But my first comment, I guess, would be that I take it that your background conception is not behaviorist, because you mentioned about these objections here that the psychopath, the sex offender, the addict, they can kind of take substances, even various things, to moderate their behavior, which won't then alter their beliefs. So there must be something extra to their behavior that you're thinking of as their belief. So then that just got me wondering if you have a particular conception of beliefs in mind, or if you'd like this to be like quite a generalist approach, albeit one that in this particular objection excludes behaviorism.
Yeah, that's really good. That's a very good question. So with respect to, say, the sex offender, as I understand how some of the hormone therapies work is that they curb the sex offender's desire to offend. I don't know of any evidence to the effect that these hormone pills change the beliefs of the sex offender, right? Then you might say, well, what's doing the role of the behavior? What's causing the sex offender's behavior? Yeah, and it might be, that there are these beliefs, but the desire or the motivations might have a neurobiological component to them that I think that could be modified. I don't have a detailed description of that. I don't know. All I know is that sex offenders, the example given is that their desires are curbed, but their beliefs are not changed. There's no claim to that effect. And I think that idea is enough to preserve the coherence of my argument, I think. Yeah. So I don't know if I need to assume behaviorism or not. I think my argument can be made coherent one way or the other.
No, that's helpful. I just had in mind a classical behaviorist picture where there's nothing more to belief than the manifest behavior.
Oh.
That's just what a belief is. So
Right.
actually, and it's not like a very popular view anymore, so I think that you're right, that you can just say, that's not the conception of belief that I'm working with here.
Mm-hmm.
And that allows you to say exactly what you have said
Mm-hmm.
with your objections.
Yeah, I guess you're right on that. I would resist reducing belief to just observable behavior. Yeah, I would. Yeah, that's right. For a number of different reasons, right? Right. Not just to preserve coherence in my argument here, but there are a number of different reasons for rejecting that.
Absolutely. Helen, I saw you have a hand there.
Yeah, I was just thinking, is it true that we're so confident about our own capacities? Because surely what we can say is when I get things wrong, it tends to be in a certain way. So let's say you're OCD, okay, and let's say it's someone who's over scrupulous. I mean, that person might say, well, I'm always worrying about things, okay, and usually whether it's friends telling me or whatever, I defer to them a bit because I know I tend to err in that direction, okay, and if there's a pill that will make me feel more comfortable doing what I think, what I think is probably the right thing, and my friends ought to say is the right thing, but which worries me, that might be no bad thing, or someone may be, may recognize themselves that they're, whether they're semi-psychopath or just a very sort of selfish person, they may sort of realize that about themselves and think, well, if I become more empathetic, then I'll probably be making better choices, even though at the moment they're just as undecided about some particular issue as the kind of situation you were talking about in your presentation. So I'm just wondering whether it's not possible to correct for your normal, sort of kind of error. Yeah.
So in those cases, there might not be a hard and fast line or borderline between the following two things, right? So when you are suspicious of your own faculties, or you gave the specific example of maybe lacking a little empathy, and you might think, if I were more empathetic, I might be able to get it right on some of these ethical issues. And I guess when I think about that, is that I'm inclined to think, well, that would be a scenario where you already are inclined to towards that viewpoint, whatever that viewpoint is that the empathy you believe would dispose you towards, right? Call that V, right? It seems like you're already sympathetic with that viewpoint. That's one thing. You might also describe the case where, hey, the person just thinks, if I were more empathetic, I would get my moral judgments right, with no, kind of indiscriminate, not mentioning any particular viewpoint, right? There is interesting because I don't see how, my argument was crafted around epistemic rationality and having which fundamentally is a notion where I'm looking for coherence between my beliefs. There, I do think that there's space to say that my argument doesn't touch that case, right? It doesn't touch the case where if I just think generically, if I were more empathetic, I would get things right, with no specific commitment in mind. But then I think, there's some evidence out there to suggest that empathy can actually frustrate justice judgments. They actually get in the way of making justice judgments. I don't have the citation offhand, but I came across something to that effect. So one might think, well, if I'm just empathetic and I improve my empathy, I might get it right on some issues, but not others. That seems fair to suppose as well. But yeah, in the case that you describe where there's no commitment to a viewpoint, or you just kind of, I wish I were more empathetic, and this pill is going to make me more empathetic, fine. In that scenario where there's no prior commitment, there's no forethought of what kind of beliefs would actually change, then one remains rational. Okay. Jason.
Yeah. First of all, thanks, Stephen, for that great paper. I kind of got a more foundational question. Thinking in terms of, especially like some of the examples that are right up here on the screen. The term moral enhancement is the term everyone uses, but often this seems like moral therapy, right? Because the starting point always just seems to be, a lack of empathy or so on, whether it's a pathological lack or just, I could be more empathetic. So it's always starting with some sort of lack. And of course, and so I guess, the term enhancement, my glasses are enhancing my vision qua individual me, but we don't consider them a form of enhancement qua species. So,
right, yeah.
And so this is just like the terminological point that a lot of times when we're talking about moral enhancement, Savulescu and Persson do want the species to be morally better than we are as a species. But then when we get down to, particular examples, it seems like, we're really just doing moral therapy using biotechnology, and that the only difference maker here is not the change that's being made, but the means we're using to change it. Setting aside again the Persson-Savulescu project. I just kind of want you to get your thoughts on just how the way this debate's been framed.
Yeah. Okay. So this is good. And I really like your work on this, where you focus on the species, right? And I think those are that's the right way to think about it. I guess what motivated this particular project is one is coming across the Crockett study, where specific beliefs were being affected. There was a promise here that you increase serotonin levels and you change one's beliefs on concrete ethical dilemmas. That was kind of cool. There are other studies. Turbeck found that beta blockers actually affect one's implicit racism. And so that's what's motivating this project, are specific means by which one's beliefs are changed. So I thought that those particular studies were very interesting, and they're in the back of my mind. In terms of moral therapy, now I do think the conclusions that I have here can be exported to those scenarios, because when you think about moral therapy and getting better, what does better look like? And any kind of cashing out of what better looks like is going to have to name certain beliefs. Right? You're going to have to believe this, that, and so I do think that if, again, the trilemma then is, well, if I already disagree with those beliefs, I'm not going to be rational in taking the moral therapy, right? If I already agree with those beliefs, then it would be obsolete. And then if I'm undecided, then I don't have a reason for it. or at least no reason for favoring the moral therapy over the exercise of my own faculties in, say, getting psychotherapy or something like that, right? So yeah, so I don't know if I'm addressing your question directly, but in the back of my mind were these specific empirical studies that were promising a change in people's beliefs.
Yeah, no, that's helpful. That clarifies some things. I'm just curious, have you read Harris Weissman's The Myth of the Moral Brain?
The Myth of the No, I haven't.
Yeah.
Maybe.
I wrote a book
Sounds
review of it a few years back. He critiques, I can't remember if he critiques these particular studies, but he definitely critiques the sort of empirical approach that's been taken to, again, increase oxytocin in the brain. You have more cooperative behaviors. Like, well, do we want more cooperative Nazis? I.e., they're being more cooperative with each other, right? And being therefore a better Nazi army. So again, the whole point being, we need some sort of, fundamental telos here of, what are we orienting ourselves towards? What types of beliefs ought we to be forming? What types of emotional reactions and so on?
Yeah, and once we do, I think then, like, either we agree with them or we don't, and then we get into the rationality of that. That Weissman might be the one who I was thinking of earlier about empathy. Empathy helps with some moral judgments, but it also gets in the way of justice judgments. Exacting just retribution, not death penalty cases, but just justice. So no, thank you for that. That's very helpful to frame it a little bit further than that.
I've got another question, but I just want to check that I'm not abusing chair privilege too much.
No.
So if anyone else, just raise your hand or type in the chat if you've got anything to throw in. Yeah, actually, that was a very helpful discussion you had with Jason there. Addressed something else I was going to ask you about, why you defined moral enhancement as a change in belief. That's just one thing that struck me, is that, so assume some kind of moral realism. There is a right and a wrong. Well, what if after I take the moral, say I believe that killing is wrong, okay? And say that that's like true in this moral realist picture. Now I take some serotonin or whatever it is, I'm still going to believe that killing is wrong, because it's just that I originally had it right. So I don't actually change my beliefs. I just continue to think that killing is wrong. Maybe I believe it even more in a sense. So if you have a picture of a sort of web of beliefs where some beliefs are kind of like more central and others are more periphery, maybe like the moral enhancement, instead of changing my beliefs, it entrenches it. It enables the belief to move more towards the middle, because I'm like, yeah, killing is really wrong. I'm just more sensitive to the truth, to the moral reality or whatever it is. Now it makes a lot more sense given what you've said to Jason, because you're trying to capture whatever phenomena is being hooked onto by these studies. And it's almost one of these things, like, you can only observe the moral effect when there's change. So much more difficult to track, how much do you believe that like killing is wrong or that sort of thing. So so that makes a lot more sense to me. But like in a wider project, would you see the question of moral enhancement as one that's bigger than just changing your moral beliefs, I suppose, is the question?
Yeah, I see. So I was trying to find a slide where I think this is it. So moral enhancement can be understood in those three different ways. At least my reading of the literature, literature kind of talks about moral enhancement as modifying one's beliefs, one's faculty for generating beliefs, whatever that faculty is, or college of faculties, or modifying one's behavior. So Now I don't, yeah, a wider project could speak to maybe 2 and 3 more directly on this slide. But I don't see an argument there that Jason talks about this in one of his chapter and an article about taking something that assists your faculties, your species-specific faculties, not replacing them. And I think that, you know, if somebody already believes that, say, chastity is good or something like that, they might take a pill or something that helps them behave in accordance with that belief. Okay, I don't see that as irrational. I don't see any argument there that would, at least not a plausible argument, to suggest that that would be irrational. So at least with respect to this project, I only see room on this issue to argue that it's irrational from the first person perspective with an notion of epistemic rationality, when what is at issue here is a change in one's belief. Outside of that, I don't see any problem, at least not with respect to epistemic rationality.
Okay, that's really helpful. I mean, I absolutely really like the approach you're taking here. It's a very nice move to say that, in a sense, there's no such thing as rational moral enhancement, only rational moral change. Because, you know, if you're judging a moral system to be better, I'm just kind of crudely putting, you know, your main thesis here. If you judge a moral system to be better, then you already adopt that moral system in a sense, and so there's no enhancement. You just already, it just deflates to the moral system that you're now inhabiting. So I really like that direction. It really reminds me of ways that extreme skepticism is often addressed by, for example, G.E. Moore and even Russell. But I wonder, yeah, just to push back on it a little bit, something that Helen was kind of bringing up. So I think what you're talking about has always been to do with particular moral dilemmas or choices. So say that I think it's epistemically, okay, so for example, we all know that we can be irrational. So it's sort of what Jason was saying, like you start with some kind of moral lacking that you're aware of. So I might say, you know, whenever I'm kind of, you know, moody on a Friday, or whenever I'm hungry, for example, whenever I'm hungry, I make bad decisions, you know, and I treat people very badly, and it's morally inept of me. So I'm going to make sure I always have a good sandwich or something on, you know, to make sure that I don't give them a hunger grump. And, you know, like you did talk a little bit about, you know, things that can be seen as alternative moral enhancements. But I'm wondering, can't I make the decision? I'm going to take an enhancement pill that's going to kind of do the same effect as the sandwich, right? And I'm going to take it because it's rational for me to take it, because I'm not faced with a particular moral decision in front of me, but I'm thinking, in the past, I thought I had it right, and on further reflection, I think I had it wrong. And so I'm going to take this pill so that when future moral conundrums hit me in the face, I'm more likely to get them right in the moment.
Right. Okay. So it looks like these cases, well, there was some literature back a ways where they looked at judges' judgments. I forget exactly, right? And, you know, right before lunch, they were really harsh, and right after lunch, they were, right. So if you knew that, you're going to have a snack throughout the day and make sure, right? There's nothing, I don't see anything irrational about that, but here's why that's consistent with my argument, because you already have a reason for thinking that your faculty might be unreliable, particularly in those circumstances, right? So the setup in my trilemma was that the act utilitarian knows, or has very, high degree of confidence, that it is permissible to kill a one in these judicial murder cases. And so when I'm offered this serotonin pill, that's going to change that belief. That's no one's going to do it. No one's going to choose to do that. Whereas if I am told that, hey, say my act utilitarian beliefs are a function of ghrelin. Ghrelin is actually the chemical that makes you feel hungry. Let's just say, let's assume that. Well, then I have a reason for thinking that my faculties are not reliable. Yeah, I wouldn't be irrational in doing something to shore up their reliability, right? Because I would be sharpening what I think needs sharpening. I'd be acting in a way that is coherent with my with my belief that my faculties are not completely reliable in this or that circumstance. More generally speaking, when you have higher order defeaters or higher order evidence would affect the reliability of one's faculties. First order evidence would affect the evidence for one's first order beliefs. In the setting of higher order evidence, that is a higher order of rationality or rational considerations where, again, if I have evidence that my faculties are not reliable, then it would be perfectly rational to do something that would shore them up. Okay. And that's perfectly consistent with my argument because I'm not acting against a belief that I have. Right. In the same way that, say, the act utilitarian would be going against a belief that she has by taking the serotonin enhancing pill and being fully informed of the Crockett study. Is that?
Yeah, no, that's very helpful. I'm just, so see the disanalogy here between saying I'm really grumpy, so I'm going to have a sandwich versus I'm really grumpy, so I'm going to have a serotonin pill. To me, those could potentially both be ways of shoring up your unreliable moral faculty. You could believe. So the disanalogy here seems to be about the fact that this is me just trying to digest what you've said, for want of a better expression. That the sandwich is not going to cause me to change my underlying beliefs, whereas the serotonin pill might. Is that the?
Well, okay. So maybe maybe I need a little more specific setup. So let's take the judge's situation. So that the judge's case where as they got more and more hungry, their judgments were more and more harsh.
Yeah.
All right. So, and then they're informed of this study. Right. So they now have higher order evidence that when they're hungry, their justice judgments are a little bit off. Okay. What would it be rational for them to do? Well, when you get right down to it, the neurobiology of it all, it's ghrelin, right? They need to sate the ghrelin. And so one way to do that, or glucose levels, I think, is the best way to solve that problem. Taking a serotonin, well, let's say taking a pill that would make their justice judgments more empathetic. You're right, that would solve the problem as well. But notice that too is consistent with what they believe. It wouldn't be irrational for them to do that because they know that their faculties are, they know how, being informed of the study, right? They know that the more hungry they get, the less empathetic they get, right? So if they got something that compensated for their empathy, right? Whether it's a granola bar or, a serotonin enhancing pill, they would solve that problem. So there again, I would say that that would be rational. But again, the reason why it's rational is because it comports with their higher order evidence. Right. So this would be it's correcting their faculty. It's not changing any of their beliefs.
So the only case in which you're saying that the moral enhancement is irrational is a case where you hold a belief, a first order belief, and you happen to have specific higher order evidence that if you take a pill, it's going to possibly change that belief. It's irrational for you to then take that pill, because if you took the pill, you've already given up the first order belief somewhere, because you've said like, oh, I'd prefer to believe this other moral thing, and I'll take the red pill, that kind of thing.
That's right.
So that's just to be clear. So that's my own misunderstanding. I thought that you were saying something a lot more global, which is that rational and moral enhancement is always irrational. But you're not against the idea that, say that we take some serotonin pill, but we don't have any higher order defeaters for the first order beliefs we have. We just take the serotonin pill and we go out in the world and we see what happens, what we believe. Do you think that scenario is okay?
Well, that might be irrational for other reasons, because you don't know the scope, right? You don't know this. If I just take
drugs.
Because of drugs but I mean, again, when you look at the evidence, empathy enhancement affects a bunch of other beliefs, and not necessarily in a way that preserves reliability. So that I would push back on an agent's rationality or their epistemically rational decision to do that. You're right. Your first comment, you're right. I am focused on doxastic enhancement. Right. I do think that when you focus on this particular slide, right, on one, maybe two, I do think that my conclusions do follow that all enhancements that affect one's doxastic states are irrational, or they lack a reason for taking the enhancement. We're getting at some cases in category two there, where we're taking modifications that affect the faculty. But notice, I'm inclined to think that, well, one reason why I would take a modification that affects my faculty is because of the outputs of that faculty. I'm judging the enhancement with reference to what it's going to produce, right? What the effect it's going to have on my faculty, and faculties produce beliefs, right? So what I'm suggesting there is that it might be very rare, I don't know, it might be very rare for someone to take a pill that enhances their empathy with really no doxastic idea in mind of what they want to do with that, right? It seems like if somebody's going to do that, they're modifying their faculty, they have a doxastic state in mind. And once you do that, then my trilemma recapitulates, I think.
Well, what about quite a mundane reason? Like, I've taken this pill because it's advertised as a moral enhancement and I'm really gullible. I think, oh, moral enhancement, that sounds great. I'd like to be morally better, and then I just take it and roll with it. I mean,
right. Go ahead.
you're saying that that's not a rational. I mean, I don't deny that it's not inherently the most rational thing I've ever done. But you do sort of take these. But again, I think it'd be harsh to call it irrational. Say that I took it on a trial basis and I said, I'm going to take this pill for Lent, and then I'm going to reflect on my decisions that I made, and I'm going to say whether I thought I ended up with better moral judgments in the particular cases. I'm going to come off the pill and then I'm going to assess. So I'm going to basically create my own self-study to give myself higher order defeaters or not. Would that be like irrational enough?
Yeah, I guess I'm having a hard time with how you judge better, at least from the first person perspective, right? You're going to judge better while you're on the pill that my beliefs are right. And when you're off the pill, you're going to think, those weren't better. Right. So I don't know how the better would be judged in those cases. I think if I understand the problem, you're trying to find room, and I appreciate this. You're trying to find room where, why can't we just say that somebody just, this pill comes out and it says that it's going to make you better. You go and you get the pill, or you start taking the pill or the neuroprosthetic or whatever. I think in some of those cases where there's this kind of a thoughtless consumption of pharmacologics or neural devices or whatever it might be, they're, calling it irrational might be a little bit harsh, but notice it is bereft of a reason.
Yeah.
They wouldn't have a reason for doing that, or at least if we really push back on people who would make that decision, do you have a reason for favoring this promise augmentation plus your faculties or your faculties alone? And I suspect that there would be no reason for favoring the augmentation for those people.
Yeah, I accept that. I think that's right. So even if I have the reason of this little experiment where so I keep a diary of all my moral judgments over Lent,
okay.
While I was on the pill. I think that you're right that you can maintain the same line there, because what you can say is, when I enter into the process of deliberative reflection, right, which I think we can give a lot of credence there, it's not a simple yes or no, was I right? Yes, no. I have to make a judgment whether or not what I'm believing lines up with moral reality, so that's always just a judgment. That's the problem here, that we can't see it directly. And you're just going to say, at the end of the day, the deliberative process, it can't be described as an enhancement. It's just going to be a different judgment. Either I'm going to think I got it right, or I'm going to think, oh no, actually I was doing better off the pill. And then if I go on the pill to make this deliberative judgment, I might make a different deliberative judgment. And so basically, because you're always stuck in a point of view, you can't get to God's point of view and see moral reality for what it is, because you're always stuck in a point of view. There is no sense of moral enhancement. There's only just moral change. Would you say that's a fair kind of summing up of what you're putting back to me there?
Yeah, so it would be, all you would be able to say if you take this pill for Lent and you're keeping track of your judgments, all you would be able to say is that your beliefs changed.
Yeah. Okay, cool.
Right? Yeah. I don't think you could say that it was enhanced. No, true. And you might back up and say, well, this is a problem with moral enhancement. That's actually a different problem, right? It's a problem that, well, what's going to count as moral enhancement is theoretically impossible, because then we have to settle on what's going to count as the right judgment.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would be a different objection to moral enhancement. And one, by the way, that I think, I guess one of the significant conclusions that follow is that from what I'm trying to argue is that we wouldn't have to settle any of those questions. We wouldn't have to settle the theoretical question about what's the stock set of true moral judgments, or even the practical problems or anything like that. From the first person perspective, when we're discussing doxastic enhancements, it's either obsolete, irrational, or bereft of a reason for taking it in the cases of being undecided. I think those are the only results that follow. Right. And that's prior to any other, logically prior to any other problem. I mean, it just wouldn't be practically, no agent would be justified in taking it. Right.
No, that's good. That's yeah, sorry for taking up so much there, but that's really helpful. It has a very good, it follows very similarly a very interesting, Putnam's, and I don't know if you know his internal external realism stuff, about is water H2O, and in what sense would you ever know that? So what you were saying at the end there reminded me of that, because in a sense, whether or not moral reality matches up, you're kind of stuck in the internalist schema when you're describing something as an enhancement. So yeah,
That's
no,
right.
it's a very nice dilemma. Before I finish up and thank Stephen, is there anyone else wants to throw anything in? Okay, great. I'm hoping everyone's still with us, or we're just going to log off. It's like sometimes people have their camera on. Okay, you're just kind of hoping, aren't you? Like I'm in a bit of an internalist standpoint here myself, where I think that there's lots of participants.
There are other minds, yeah.
There are other minds, yeah. That's now before we get onto that issue. Yeah, let me just thank you, Stephen, because it's a really interesting issue. I really like the talk that you've given. I'm not surprised you've already been published here, so thank you for coming and explaining it to us. We hope to have you back at the BIOS seminar in the future. Yeah, thank you so much for the invite. It's really fun.
Thank you.
you.